Shut up and sit down.
Howdy guys, it's Andy from Big Mac's Workshop Painting Studio, and it's a Warcry Fury today. I'm doing this style of a gremlin from the Gremlins 2 film, making it look a little bit different to what you'd normally see. So as always, we're getting right on into it, and we start off with a nice thin coat of Cayman Green by Vallejo. And I'm doing this because I want it to look, like I said, like a bit of a gremlin, got that sort of weird green pattern into it. But I'm going to do something a little bit different with it as well. I'm going to blend some oranges in, really jazz it up, make it look a little bit different. So once I've got the Cayman Green down, I've added some Scale 75's Mern Green, and that's just going to darken it up a bit, and I'm just painting that into the recesses, add a little bit of a colour depth into it, especially around about where the spines on the wings are, underneath his any of the recesses underneath his torso, that sort of thing. After that is some more Mern Green, and I'm using the same technique. I'm just keeping it more in the deepest sections. I just adding, like I say, it's just adding a little bit of colour variation to it, just a little bit more depth. Now you can't really see it very well at the minute, but it does start to bring out the highlighted areas. I say highlighted areas, they're not highlighted, but the single colour areas really nicely. So now I'm doing the same thing, just the other way around. I've added some Rancor flesh to the Cayman Green, and I'm just feathering that into the highlighter areas now, just to bring some lift to the upper sections, adding some nice gentle highlights in, and keeping the paint really thin so I can blend it into the other colours as well. Even more Cayman Green with the Rancor flesh. I'm just adding more highlights to the areas, just bringing the details out a little bit, give us something to work with when we start to really advance in the painting. So now I've added some Mern Green into the Cayman Green again, and I'm feathering it back into the darker sections to blend together the highlights and the shades. Just working the colours up and down. I'm keeping this paint really thin, really wet, so I can blend it in to the other colours, so you get a nice gentle transition. So now I've added some more Rancor flesh into the Cayman Green. As you can see, I'm really starting to pick out the highlights now. It's quite time consuming doing it this way. It's not the way you'd want to paint an entire army as such, but there's a nice little play around, just doing something a little bit different. It was a bit of an experiment for me. I want to see, like I say, I wanted to replicate something from TV. So now it's Misfits Green by Scale 75 into the mixture, and I'm adding those highlights really vibrant on certain areas, just to bring that colour up to a nice sharp highlight. So I'm doing the same thing on the undersides now. I'm just adding some highlights into the undersides of the wings, using the same colours as before, and just adding those gentle highlights underneath, as if the wings are sort of transparent slightly, so the membrane's really thin, so they're going to get a little bit of a light coming through. I'm just taking the paint down with the Mern Green and the Misfits Green to the darker sections as well, and just constantly moving the paint up and down so you get really smooth transitions, and you get a very cool effect when you finally get to the level where you want to be. So I've added in some more Rancor flesh, I'm just bringing those highlights up again on the wings. As you can see, I'm really starting to expand those highlights. Now the reason I'm bringing them up quite so bright is because I'm going to do a colour shift from the green into an orange later, so having that light colour is going to help me get a nice transition into the orange, really enabling me to add the orange in a lot earlier using the lighter green to start off with. And using the really vibrant colour we've got, I'm starting to pick out the details in the wings. Now there's some already built in. I'm also making my own. I'm just doing some little painting in some little creases with a 00 just to make the wing look a bit more alive, and I'm doing that across both sides of the wings as well. And it just adds a little bit more character to the wings. And then once you've done that, you go back to the Mern green and do exactly the same thing, just on the undersides of these highlight points, and that'll add a little bit of depth to them, makes them look a bit more three-dimensional, and you get a really nice, it just adds a little bit more detail to the model. So now I'm starting to add some shrapnel red by scale 75 onto the model. As you can see, I'm starting to put some oranges into where the hands meet the wrists. I also be expanding this onto the wings and the feet as well. It just adds a little bit more colour to the model. It's just not one flat green colour, which would be a little bit dull. As you can see, I'm using really thin layers. It goes quite browny over the green, but that's understandable. But as you start building up the layers to the model, you do start to add a nice touch to it. Now these things here look like horns. I made them. I thought they were ears at first, but I found the ears later on. So I did actually change my mind on that. But as you can see, I'm just adding some Cayman green into the mixture, which 3698 done again. So what I've done is I've added some Cayman green into the mixture, and that's going to allow me to blend the colours together really easily, really smoothly, and so you don't get any weird streaks or anything. You get a nice smooth blend between the green and the orange, and it just makes it look loads better if you just take your time. Like I said, it's very time consuming doing it this way. You could do it quite easily with an airbrush, but I wanted to do this by hand because it's a bit more fun. So it is shrapnel red with chink orange by scale 75, and just starting to highlight the colours together, focusing more towards the high points, but I'm adding those into the mixture with the Cayman green as well, and that's just to blend the transition even more. It just takes a little bit of time, but it's well worth it. So now I'm using pure chink orange at this point, and this is going to be added as a highlight to all the other areas. As you can see, I've started working on the wings as well. I hadn't decided to go onto the membrane of the wings at this point, but that's something I moved to later on. So now it's added some Rackar flesh into the mixture. Rackar flesh is a really good colour. As you know, Dodge uses it a hell of a lot. I've started using it a lot more than I did, and it doesn't change the tone of the colours very much. It just lightens them up. So it's a really nice colour for adding to highlights. It should be it should definitely be one that you pick up at some point. Really nice to help highlight, and you can use it on most colours as well. So even more Rakosh, and as you can see I'm starting to add the colours into the membrane of the wings, using the same colours as before, and keeping the paint really thin so I can feather it out really nicely, and I don't have to stretch it any further than I want it to. So I've got on the, onto the underside, and it is a mixture of Cayman Green, Rakosh Flesh and Chink Orange, and what you're getting is a weird greeny orangey colour, and this allows you to just blend it all in really nicely, and you get this cool transition. Just keep it really thin and just pick it up. You've got to give it a couple of minutes to dry now and then, because otherwise you'll be moving the paint off the model. But once it's dried, you go back on it and do another layer, blend the colours together again, and just keep on doing it at that. Just let it dry now and then, just to give the paint time to stick to the model, and then you're not moving it around too much. So now I've mixed a wash, and that is a 50-50 wash of Aphonian Camo Shade and the Army Paint Strong Tone. So you got a kind of a weird orangey green out of this, and it just adds, it brings out the detail in both the green and the orange, because of that sort of kind of a hybrid colour. Just adds a bit more depth to everything. So now I'm using Decay Black, scale 75, but any black will do. Just starting to pick out all the extra details on the model, trying to figure out where the horns are for nails. He's got kind of a beard thing going on, so I'm picking out all that, making sure that everything's good to go, ready for the next stage. So onto all his horns and claws, which is Vallejo's model colour. Heavy brown, I believe it's model colour. Starting to paint all his claws and horns. Turns out he has actually got horns. I thought they were ears at first, sticking out the side of his head. So they go heavy brown as well, and getting a nice coat across all of the horns and claws, just to mark them out as a completely different section. After that, it is a strong tone mix, just pure strong tone wash onto the horns. And any of the areas what will be a kind of a bone texture. Now, as always, these washes are thinned down. Not thinning this down particularly much, just a little bit, just to stop it from pooling too heavily. Do want it to spread out a little bit. So now it is back to heavy brown for the first section, and as you can see, I'm just starting to highlight the horns as they are, using this heavy brown. It's a good way of getting a first highlight on, is going back to the first colour over the initial washes. Just takes away that initial starkness, and it gives you a gentle highlight as well to work with. After the heavy brown, I've added some bone. Now, any bone works for this, Screaming Skull or anything like that. It's just a small amount at this stage. I'm just highlighting the bone colours. Now, what I've done is on the horns, I'm keeping the orange visible slightly. So I'm highlighting the bone into the orange, so you get a kind of a transition from the bone to the orange as well. It just adds a little bit more to it. It's something that I thought about on the fly. So even more bone now, and I'm doing exactly the same thing, just on a narrower section. As you can see, I'm using a very narrow brush at this point, because all the details are quite small. I'm focusing on the most raised sections of the model, and just picking out all those nice highlights really gently, trying to be as neat as possible. So now it is dark sea green onto the stonework. Nice standard grey. It's any grey would work. I just wanted to do this was the one what was to hand at the time. I do apologise about any of the camera work here. It's a weird shape model, so it makes it quite difficult to get certain areas on camera at times. So I do apologise. So getting a good coat of the dark sea green all over the display base section. So rust now, which is a Vallejo Game Air metallic paint. Decided to go for a bronzy coloured dagger hilt. Probably a bad choice, as it happened to become very close to the skin colour, but with adding a few highlights, it does separate it slightly. For the blade, it is Vallejo's black metal, or metallic black. Really good colour for any base metallic work. It's nice and dark and highlights really nicely. Non-oil has now gone on to all the stonework, just to add a bit of depth to it. You can't go wrong with non-oil over the greys. Just make sure you thin it down properly. You don't want it pooling up too much. So onto the beard. It's Scale 75's Brain Eater Azure. Similar sort of colour to Demonette Hide, I suppose. Sort of a weird purpley colour, which I thought looked quite striking against the quite muted greens and oranges. So I wanted something a little bit brighter, just to add a little bit more colour to it. And it turns out it's on the colour wheel as one of the contrasting colours, so it works really nicely alongside these. So onto the metalwork again. I've added some chain into the rust, starting to add some highlights. As you can see, it's starting to come away from the orange colour it was. So you can see the separation between the hand and the hand guard on the knife. So even more chain at this point, adding these to the most upper reaches of the blade, and just to have a handle, just to make them pop really, just finish that section off a little bit. So Leandrus Grey by Scale 75. No. So moving on to the 3723. Moving on to the detail work on the rocks. I've got some like metallic areas, and just doing exactly the same thing as what I used for the dagger as well, just to bring it all together and make it look a bit more interesting. Otherwise it'd be just plain grey. So it's Leandrus Grey now at Scale 75. It's going straight over the top, not doing anything fancy on this, just picking out the details using the side of a brush, trying to feather it a little bit so the highlights are a little bit more visible than the other highlights on the wings and such, but it's still not overpowering. And Miskatonic Grey for the top highlights of the beard. As you can see, it really stands out now. You get a nice effect using the Miskatonics. It's kind of a purpley grey. It's a really nice soft colour. Adds a lot to your paintwork. Agrax Earthshade into the beard, just to tone it down a little bit. It was a little bit too striking at this point. I just wanted to subtle it off a little bit, and just to adds a little bit more depth and a bit more of a brownie colour to it as well. So now I've gone back to the dark sea green. I've added some Miskatonic Grey into it. I'm starting to pick out the highlights. I'm not doing this over the top because the base isn't the focus point of the model, but it does need doing. So I'm just adding a few nice gentle highlights to the rocks, just to make it look a bit more finished. So it's got even more Miskatonic Grey in now. and I'm doing exactly the same thing. Obviously, just focusing on the more prominent areas now, rather than as an all-over highlight. Really focusing on those upper sections and making that little rock section look a bit more polished. You don't want it to detract from the model either, even though you don't want it to stand out too heavily. And a final highlight, which is almost pure Miskatonic Grey, just to finish on those edges and get a nice sharp finish. I've added some strong tones, some blue shade, just to make the beard look a bit more blue. It went a little bit grey for my liking, so I'm just adding a bit more of a blue depth to it, just to make it that bit more separate from the rocks. So on to the flesh again. It's Scale 65's Undead Flesh. Really picking out those highlights, really making them strike along the top of his head and any other most prominent areas. Now, as you can see, I'm just using a very fine brush, just working around his face, his nose, his eyes, and his cheekbones, and I'm just building those highlights up a little bit, just to make it a bit more interesting. And now I've added some Cayman Green into the Undead Flesh. So it's a bit more of a softer highlight, so I can go into some of the darker areas and just bring them up along the back of his spine. And there you have it. That is one Warcry Fury, influenced by the Gremlins films, and yeah, it's a really nice little model. It was fun to do something a little bit different. I'm really trying to change my painting style a little bit. I'm trying to go for softer highlights, which means I need to bring them up more. But this was a nice experiment in just playing about with some different colours, what I don't use a lot, and I quite enjoyed it. So anyway, that's enough of me waffling. Thank you for you guys for watching this. Without you watching, there'd be no point in us making these videos. So thank you for that. Got some thank yous to make as well. Thank yous go out to Bjork Boys, Matt, Ludwig Hofbauer, Warren, D. Wack, Kit Linquist, The Atmos of Dawn, and Mark. So huge thank yous to you guys. Without your support on Patreon, we wouldn't be able to fund any of this, so thank you to that. Also, would like to thank the Outpost, which is our affiliate link. Check the link in the description below. They do reduced price models for pretty much any game you can imagine. And we also cater to all your hobby needs, so massive thank you to them. Check them out. If you go through our affiliate links whenever you buy something from them, you get the standard benefits of going to a third-party store, and we get 5% store credit as well. So that also helps us get more toys in for you guys to watch. Anyway guys, thank you for watching this, and we shall catch you in the next one. Ta-ra!